Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Greatest Games podcast on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me, of course, is Jonathan Wilson. With us today is Paul Myers, the sports editor at Radio France International's English service. Paul, a pleasure to have you on the pod.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honoured.
Oh, not at all, Paul. It's this is quite the game you've picked here, and I'm delighted to say that today we go back to the 12th of February, 2012, Africa Cup of Nations final in Libreville, a game that ended 0-0 between Zambia and Ivory Coast, but of course Zambia won the game 8-7 on penalties. Paul, why have you chosen this game?
Because I remember being completely engulfed in the sentiment. I wasn't a great football historian before taking up my position as a sports editor. And gradually, I obviously got to know about the story of Zambian football. And well, here's the story to be quite dull about it. I first went to the Africa Cup of Nations in Ghana in 2008. And I was in the presence of Kalusha Bwalia. And I was just really not that impressed because I didn't know who he was. And one of my RFI colleagues said, "That's Kalusha Bwalia." And I just kind of raised an eyebrow. That's the extent of my ignorance at the time. And so I went back and looked up and thought, okay, yeah, he's an important bloke. And I then got to meet him in 2010 in Angola, and got his number and just got to know a bit about him and what he'd done. And I interviewed him for one of my programs on the English service, when he told me about his plans to employ Hervé Renard and build a team and of youngsters, quite reminiscent of how he had grown up in the Zambia national football team, and to create a project, and that's where it started. And I just got very involved in the Zambian project without being kind of completely convinced about it. And of course, strangely enough, I spoke to Jonathan just before the start of the 2012 Africa Cup of Nations, and at no point during our 5-minute chat did he mention, "Oh, Zambia, they've got a really good chance of winning." Yeah. And he said, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and we rapped about Cote d'Ivoire and things. But at no point was Zambia on anybody's radar, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, they just weren't. I mean, I guess they'd have been 10th, 11th favourite, something like that. but of course, I mean, the thing, we should explain the sort of the history of Zambia and why Kalusha is such a huge figure. So the team he grew up in is this great young team, and they went to the Olympics in '88, and they beat Italy 4-0, and Kalusha scored a hat-trick. There's this brilliant young team, and they were heavily backed by Kenneth Kaunda, the very left-wing president of Zambia, and they were known as the KK11 because they were so associated with him. When he lost power in the early 90s at the end of the Cold War, when his sort of brand of socialism wasn't viable anymore, the funding sort of dried up for Zambian football. And the terrible consequence of that was they started flying to games in this old military plane that wasn't really fit for purpose. And they had a couple of hairy moments. And then they were going to a game in Senegal, so flying from Zambia to Senegal, and they refueled in Libreville. This is 1993. And as the plane took off from Libreville, it exploded. And 18 players and 4 coaches were killed. Kalusha and a couple of other players weren't on the plane because they played in Europe, so they were making their own way to Senegal. Kalusha then, and he was still a young man then, is sort of the centre of the efforts to put the team together. Ian Porterfield comes in as coach, who scored the winner in the 73 Cup final for Sunderland, was Chelsea manager for a while. And they did extraordinarily well. And they got the final of the 94 Cup of Nations where they lost to the great Nigeria. And they also got to within one game of qualifying for 94 World Cup. And they lost the final game to Morocco. And the referee for that game was from Gabon. And there was a lot of political issues between Gabon and Zambia about the crash, about who should pay for the investigation, about even who should pay for the repatriation of the bodies. Really, what should be very basic stuff. And it became very, very hostile and very, very unpleasant. And there was this real tension between Zambia and Gabon at a political level and at a sporting level. And so Zambia hadn't played in Gabon in Libreville between 1993 and 2012. And the tournament in 2012 was split between Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. And the only way they could play in Libreville, Zambia, the way the draw worked, was if they got to the final. So it just, I don't think if anybody was even thinking that this was a possibility, because the thought of them getting to the final was incredibly remote. So that's and then Clichy had become president of the FA by then, and as Paul says, it had begun his own project with Hervé Renard, the former Cambridge manager, who's now, I think, very well known. But at the time, he was just a guy who used to be a dustbin man in France, right? He wasn't.
Well, no, he's a bit more than that. He's a dustbin man with a dream.
Yeah, and a great wardrobe, we should say, as well. Before he became the sort of MacGyver of African football.
Well, to be fair, it was a very, very simple. I was watching the final because, as Jonathan said, it wasn't a great final, and I thought it was me getting rather mixed up in the emotions of it, that I'd just forgotten about the football on the field. But it wasn't a great final, having looked back at it. But what I do remember are just these sartorial moments where Hervé Renard is in this white shirt and looking like, chiseled and MacGyverish. Yeah. And Francois Zahoui, the Côte d'Ivoire coach, who was in quite a slick grey suit with a white shirt and an orange tie. And then he was wearing a baseball cap as well. I thought, no, that's just not right if you look at the other bench and what Renard is wearing. But obviously somebody said something to Zahoui, because at a certain point he took the cap off and looked much more presidential and elegant. And he looked the part.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan,
very superficial.
Yeah, of course. Jonathan, when you went to the Africa Cup of Nations this year in 2012, were you, I mean, perhaps you may have been aware of some of the history of Zambia and what you've just talked about there. Was that being talked about by anybody, or is it as Zambia grew into the tournament?
I mean, with Zambia, you always know about the tragedy, you know about Clichy, and you know about the importance of his role, but they were just another team. They were there to make up the numbers. Nobody was sort of considering them as potential winners. And it was only, I mean, the first game they beat Senegal 2-1, and that I think is when people sort of sat up a little bit and thought, actually, maybe this is quite a good Zambia team. And I remember, would it have been 2000? Might have been 2002, might have been 2006. I can't remember. And they had a good forward called Blessing Kampamba, and I remember spending a bit of time with him. And there was a sort of sense then that Zambian football was building. But I mean, this was a long time before. It must have been 2006. So that's 6 years early, and Kampamba's well out the way by then. And a lot of this team, very few of this team played in Europe. A lot of them played in Zambia. And I think in some ways that helped Renard, that he was able to get them together. And the thing that was very, very obvious being around their camp, as I was for the last sort of week of the tournament, was the sort of the very sort of collegiate sense. There was a real kind of close-knit family sense. And Renard's role in that was critical. That he was one of them, but he was also very clearly a leader. And I mean, there's a moment in the final where what's he called, the right back, Davies and Kausu. And I remember Davies and Kausu got dragged too far forward, and he was by the bench because he was playing right back. And Renard literally punches him in the chest, like not a little push, a real boom punch, as he's telling him, don't ever go that far forward. You can't let Gervinho get in behind you because his pace is going to destroy you. You've got to sit deep. You've got to give him room. And Renard explained all this afterwards because people were saying, well, why were you punching Nkausu during the second half? But yeah, and then Nkausu's reaction was great because his reaction was to kind of to calm Renard down, and it was like, I don't know, it was like a nephew calming down his cranky old uncle, you know, or his granddad. Yeah, Grandpa, yeah, I get it. I know. Calm down. It's fine. So there was that closeness, and maybe you wouldn't have had that if they had been dispersed all over the world.
Yeah, Paul, did Hervé Renard have much of a reputation really going into this tournament in his native France? Because I mean, Jonathan mentioned he'd have a sort of a brief stint at Cambridge United. He'd managed lower league French level, and I think he'd managed in Vietnam. So Zambia was sort of his first big job, as far as I could see, if you could even call that a big job.
Well, that's the thing, because my first Nations Cup, as I said, was in Ghana, and that was and he was Claude Leroy's assistant for Ghana, and he'd started off actually as the physical preparation trainer. So he didn't even go in as an assistant coach. He went in as the guy who got them through their routines, and then.
And in fairness, you know, Hervé Renard's physical preparation of himself.
I'm about to say, yeah, he certainly walked the walk, didn't he? Yeah. As we would see years later in another final.
But and the great thing about him was he had this great sense of self-deprecation, because he says, I am big and I am blonde and I am good-looking, and so he knew his part, and he took that, and I think he took that side of coaching very, very seriously. And so, as Claude Leroy's assistant, so that's where he got his first taste of it. But he was always known as Claude Leroy's assistant. So when he got this first job at Zambia, say, not really a big position, and I think and when I did speak to Kalusha Bwalia, he said that was precisely the kind of guy that he wanted, somebody who was ambitious, who wanted to prove something, who wanted to step out of somebody else's shadow, somebody who was humble, but certainly with a drive. And that was Hervé Renard, and he was somebody who was European. And there was this thing at the time where local coaches weren't as highly appreciated as European coaches. And that was something that came out to me in later games, that certainly with Stephen Keshi of Nigeria, when he took them to the 2013 Cup of Nations, is that African coaches just aren't appreciated. And the thing was, strangely enough, that Hervé Renard didn't really seem to have much kudos here in France, other than being the sideman of Claude Leroy.
I think that point about the local coaches is key for Cote d'Ivoire here, that they'd appointed François Zahoui, so they had appointed a local coach, which was unusual for them. And I sort of feel he's kind of the victim in all this, because his side they weren't hugely exciting to watch, but they were very, very solid. We didn't let in a goal in the whole tournament.
Yeah, it's incredible, yeah.
No.
And they were a hair's breadth from winning the first Cup of Nations Cote d'Ivoire since '92 for Cote d'Ivoire, and he would then have been the hero in the way that Keshi was the hero as a local coach a year later. And Zahoui sort of, because they lost the final, and quite unlucky to lose the final.
Yeah.
I mean, they were quite unlucky both in how the game went and the fact that this ran into this team with the greatest sense of destiny behind it I've ever seen at any team ever.
Yeah.
And his career sort of knocked off the rails by this. And it's not really his fault. He didn't really do much wrong.
Yeah.
But he lost. Boom, off he's gone. And I've got no idea what he's done since, to be honest.
No, but
sorry, Paul.
But that's that's the sort of strange thing about it, that, as Jonathan says, they were very unlucky, and it was only preparing for the podcast that I looked back again at the game, and it was, they played solidly. They weren't spectacular. In fact, they were quite drab, but that they were doing the job. And had Didier Drogba scored in the 70th minute, we wouldn't be here talking about one of the greatest ever games, because it would have been a functional. I would imagine Jonathan would be telling me, yes, it's a functional thing. You know, who played where and who dropped back, and yes, it wasn't great, but they got the job done. The golden generation was fulfilled, and as Jonathan says, Zahui would have been a complete and utter hero. But no, he's not now, because of this greater sense of destiny behind
I
the
was
opposition.
at Cote d'Ivoire's first 4 games. I was at all 3 of the group games, and then the quarter final when they beat Equatorial Guinea 3-0. And I have to say, those games were pretty boring. They beat Sudan 1-0, beat Burkina Faso 2-0, beat Angola 2-0, and it was look. I mean, they were totally the better side in each of those games, but it wasn't football I can remember at all. 8 years later, none of that sticks for me at all, despite them having Drogba and Touré and Gervinho and a host of really good players.
But do you think it was similar to kind of maybe Deschamps' approach with France in Russia, other than
I think that's a very good. I think that's a very good analogy, and I think actually even more so because of the shape they played, like Jacquet's France in '98. They played the 4-3-2-1, so they had Kalou and Gervinho playing off Drogba, but they had that base of 3 at the back of midfield. So they had Yaya Touré in the middle, who obviously gives them a bit of creativity and was able to push forward. But then Sheikh Tioto to the left and Didier Zakora to the right. There's a very, very solid sort of screen at the back of midfield. And I guess if you know you've got the best squad in the tournament, which they clearly did, if you don't let goals, you will score goals eventually, or you certainly get the chance to score the goals. And you would expect Drogba or Bony or Kalou or Gervinho. Maybe you wouldn't expect Gervinho to score them, but
be involved in the move perhaps at some point.
Well, Gervinho is the one who created the penalty in the 70th minute, because
in the final,
he come in from the wing and had gone a bit more central and drove into the area. And in preparation, I was listening to the Ivorian commentary for the final, and obviously they were super partisan, and to the point where they called Zakora Maestro and Drogba Didier to differentiate between the 2 Didiers, and one was the Maestro. Which I thought, okay, fair enough. But they were encouraging Gervinho to just do exactly that, and to make the Zambian defence have a few worries and a few doubts, because they were handling Gervinho when he was out wide. They just weren't getting punished at all, and it's when he came in and started driving at them, that's when they started to falter a bit. And it's kind of strange that they didn't work it out before, given that they had so much tactical awareness, and almost played into Zambia's hand in that way.
I mean, Gervinho was playing, I think, for Arsenal at the time, so he's always going to be on everyone's radar at a tournament like this. I mean, Jonathan, who did you think, Ivory Coast, obviously among the favourites going into this tournament. Senegal were mentioned earlier. They went out quite badly in the first round. Where did Ghana sit in this?
Yeah, I mean, Ghana clearly were one of the favourites. They got to the final 2 years earlier with a young side. They'd done really well. I mean, they lost 1-0 to Egypt in the final. They were outplayed in that game. But they had, Asamoah Gyan, obviously. They had Kwadwo Asamoah. So they had players who would go on have very good careers in Europe. And actually, when they beat Tunisia in the quarterfinal, they were really, really good that day. And Andre Ayew was magnificent in that game. And he had the shit kicked out of him and just kept getting up and coming back for more. And eventually got his reward that the Tunisian keeper just dropped the ball at his feet and he poked it over the line extra time. But his performance in that quarterfinal is one of the great individual displays. So I mean, certainly when Ghana were then playing Zambia in the semi-final, there's no question that Ghana were the massive favourites. So I mean, like for me, the tournament, I was based in Malabo to start with, and my plan was to stay there with Cote d'Ivoire, and then after their quarterfinal, to fly to Libreville, and the quarterfinal there was Gabon against Mali, And my expectation was for Gabon to win that. And Gabon had been pretty good in this tournament. Huge home support. They had Aubameyang. He was at Saint Etienne at the time, but he was clearly kind of becoming a great player. And so Gabon v Cote d'Ivoire would have been a great semi. And so I'd gone to Libreville for the second half of the tournament. And then because of the growing Zambia story, and because Mali ended up winning that quarterfinal on penalties, and Aubameyang misses I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. The wife of the president, Sylvie Bongo, Sylvia, I think maybe rather than Sylvie. Anyway, she wore an Aubameyang shirt every game, and you sort of think in this crazy dictatorship, and in 2017, I exposed a massacre in Gabon by the government. It's it hadn't happened at this point, but it's a repressive dictatorship, and the dictator's wife is wearing your name on a shirt, and you step up in a penalty shootout and you miss it. I mean, what must that be like? The pressure he must have been under. Anyway, so because Gabon had lost, I thought Mali v Cote d'Ivoire doesn't really entice me. I can see exactly how it's going to go. It's two French-speaking teams, and my French just isn't good enough to do any work with the players, really. So you'd be relying on the Touré brothers as ever. And they are great with the media, but I've done a lot of interviews with Colo and Yaya.
Yeah, you thought you'd give them a day off.
Yeah, and so I then thought I need to go back to Bata in Equatorial Guinea to do the semi there, because Zambia clearly is the story, and also Ghana. I hadn't actually been at a Ghana game at that point.
So was it Zambia's quarterfinal win over Sudan? Was that when Zambia, suddenly they were just a game away from?
Well,
Libreville?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I still don't really think people took them seriously as potential winners. I think they were always the fourth of the four semi-finalists, but they're one game away from a match in Libreville. And your two Anglophone teams, from the point of view of somebody who doesn't really speak French, is more enticing. And so I end up, because it wasn't, even then, I mean, we're only talking about 8 years ago, it wasn't a case of just going online and buying a flight. I had to go to a travel agency. It was the whole thing was a farce, to be honest, because my credit card got they wouldn't take cards. My debit card got eaten up by the machine in a bank. So I was loaned a load of cash by a German journalist.
You don't see anymore.
I have paid him back in full. Paid for the flight in cash. And the flight left like 4 hours after I bought it. So I rushed back to the house where I was staying, picked up my stuff, raced to the airport, and I had to fly to Malabo and get a connection there. But then the flight I was meant to be on, for some reason, I think it was flying via Sao Tome and then back to Malabo. But then there was something, there was a load of Chinese workers they had to transport. So they decided they would go Libreville to Sao Tome, back to Libreville, and then on to Malabo, which meant that the window of possibility to catch this flight was getting smaller and smaller because I had to get the connection. And I'd worked out, I think I had to leave by 5:15 to have a chance of me catching the connection. And there was a few journalists there. I remember Chisholm, a Nigerian journalist, she was there, and I was chatting to her, and we both were saying it's got to come by 5:15. And 5:14, the flight turns up from Sao Tome. So we rush on this plane, and we land in, and obviously these things are never quick. And we land in Malabo, and I've got 10 minutes to spare. But you're assuming, because air travel in Equatorial Guinea is not necessarily the most efficient thing, you assume there'll be a delay in the connection, so you'll be all right. So as we come off the plane, and we know that I think it was 8 of us needed to get on this flight. I see a plane boarding on the far side of the airfield. So I say to the steward, is that the flight for Bata? And he says, yeah, it is. And I said, well, can I just run across there and get on that? And he said, well, not really. I said, yeah, but I'm going to miss it if I go into the. And he radios through, and they bring a jeep over for us. So we start off, and I'm saying, oh, hang on, we left our bags. Jeep screeches to hold. We then have to climb into the hold, and there's literally a couple of us in the hold going, "Is this yours? Is this yours?" Right, chucking it out. We then go across this plane. We get on this plane. We land in Malabo. Land in Bata. They take your fingerprints and everything, and take a photograph of you. But because I hadn't gone through immigration, because I was on a domestic flight, I never got my passport stamped with the second arrival stamp I needed. So when I then decided after the quarterfinal that after the semi-final, I go by land to Libreville, which is a beautiful trip through the jungle. I then get to the border in Mongomo, in the middle of nowhere, and they're saying, "Well, you haven't got you haven't got your immigration stamp." I'm like, "Oh no, look, I can explain this. Was this flight going to Sao Tome?"
Yeah.
And this guard's going, and this has all been good. I mean, fortunately, I had a photographer from AP who was with me, and she spoke excellent French, and so she was doing most of the talking. And this guy was going, "How do I know you haven't just? You get a lot of foreigners. How do you know you don't want them? We get a lot of foreigners who kind of come in illegally through the jungle." And she's going, "English foreigners coming in through the jungle?
Have you read Inverting the Pyramid?
Oh yeah. Anyway, we eventually get across the border, and then we had a car took us to the border, but he couldn't go across the border. So then we just had to hitch a lift on a truck down to Oyem. And Mongomo and Oyem are places I never thought I'd go to again. But of course, the way the Cup of Nations has been, I've been back to both of them since. And then we managed to get we hire a driver in Oyem to take us on to Libreville. So we got there.
Mm-hmm.
God, I can't remember, but must have been late on the Thursday night, which is relevant because look, the semi-final we should talk about. I don't know, Paul, if you had the same sense, but I'd assume Ghana would win that, having seen their quarterfinal.
Well,
I went to both camps the day before the semi, and Ghana was so complacent. I changed my mind immediately. I was like, Zambia have got this. Ghana think they're there, and they you cannot win with this attitude. There's no way they're gonna win it.
Well, I strangely didn't need to go and see Ghana again, because I'd been with them in the group stages in Franceville, and I'd seen their 4 games, the 3 games in the group stages, and then the quarter final. So I needed to switch my attention and go and hang out with Zambia and try and almost become the instant expert on all the backstory. So I spent a lot of time with the Zambians, and I got this sense that here was a really wonderful story. And so I became rather seduced by this, because I'd been with the Ghanaians so long, and I actually almost felt part of the crowd, because my first Africa Cup of Nations was in Ghana, and they were almost kind of kindred spirits. And I'd seen Andre Ayew grow up within the side, because I spoke to him when he was, I think, about 18 or 17 or 18, at his first AFCON at home in Ghana, and he was always ready to give a quote or two. So I always liked being with Ghana, because I think he remembered those early exchanges. But with Zambia, it was a similar thing. They had great spirit. So did Ghana, and Ghana almost had the same kind of problem, that they hadn't won it for so long, that there was enormous pressure on them to do well and bring the cup home. And it was somehow their sense of destiny as well to win it for the first time since 82. And so from that point of view, each team had a right to win. But then there wasn't this rather compelling narrative of the plane crash and this lost golden generation, and that for me took over much more, and that became much stronger for me. But there was a similar sense of spirit, and I just didn't get Jonathan, you say that they become complacent. Perhaps I didn't see that complacency, because I had been with them from the very, very beginning. And so when I switched camps, so to speak, I saw perhaps a different kind of spirit, which was, so that's the one.
No, I mean, I think it was for that one game. I was having seen them only on TV, but having seen them in that quarterfinal against Tunisia when they fought so hard, and it was a real battle. And I was really shocked by the attitude in the camp, having seen that game. The two didn't match at all. So I think it was as if that was such a battle. They got through it, and they sort of thought, "Oh, we can relax in this semi-final because it's only Zambia."
It's only Zambia, yeah.
And then, of course, they lose the game 1-0. Jan misses the penalty. Mayuka scores a nice curling shot with 20 minutes to go. And the thing I'll always remember from that semi-final was afterwards, we went down onto the track around the pitch, and Kalusha was there. And there was, I don't know, maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen of us chatted to Kalusha, doing an interview with Kalusha. And the thing he said, which is when I sort of realised just how big a deal the final was going to be. As he said, the final isn't going to be 11v11 because we're going to have 11 ghosts on our side as well. And as soon as he said that, I was, I mean, if you go into a game believing that, you can't lose. How do you lose?
Yeah. I mean, for me, watching it all the way back in England, seeing this narrative build about Zambia, as you say, Jonathan, that semi-final, there was something about it because the one and only time I've seen an Africa Cup of Nations, it's all in the flesh, was in Ghana as well, Paul, and I've always liked Ghana, very likeable side, and have produced some great players. But that semi-final against Zambia, as you've mentioned a number of times on this podcast before, Jonathan, you don't believe in destiny until it happens, if you see what I mean. And my goodness, that semi-final, when Jan misses the penalty, I mean, the Zambian goalkeeper, what a character he was. We'll talk about him in the second half. But yeah, when they get through there, you think, surely. Anyway, let's go for a quick break, gentlemen, and then we'll be back to talk about the final itself. See you in a moment. Welcome back to the greatest games on the Blizzards. So yes, we're finally there in the final in Libreville, and there was you talked there, Jonathan, about Kalusha being on the running track and his words there. Hervé Renard was very aware, of course, of the history, and he took his players down to the beach, didn't he, near the city?
Yeah, and that's one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen. That basically the last point the land playing across in '93, the Zambia team, the finals on the Sunday, this on the Friday, they go down there, all in the team tracksuits, and you're sort of thinking at first, oh dear, this is a bit naff. The beach was a little bit dirty, so quite a lot of litter about. They're all just there, in their tracksuits, headphones on, but just like a bunch of players, and they all have a bouquet of flowers, and then they start singing this song. I don't know exactly what it was, but some sort of national song, a very soft, slow song. And as soon as they start singing that, the mood just changed, and they walk out into the sea and lay the bouquets down. It's one of the most moving. I mean, hear my voice.
You're crazy.
Yeah. One of the most moving things I've ever seen.
But Jonathan, to come in and help you out there before you do start, I tracked down the film called 18 by a guy called Jean Rodriguez Berizo, which is a film about the whole game. It's a Spanish guy. He had no connection with Zambia, but he knew his football history a lot more than me. And he told me that what they were singing is in fact a funeral song in Zambia, but they appropriated it to become a song of joy. And he told me that he heard them. He got Chris Katongo and a few of them to sing it when he was making the film, and he said that it was one of the most moving things he had heard, because it was a celebration of death and this look of lust for life at the same time. And that was the song they were singing, and that's the song they were singing during the final.
Yeah, at the penalty shootout.
They sang it to a penalty shootout, which
and it's usually at Zambian funerals, but that didn't stop them from singing it. And this is the whole thing, that suddenly you were just on another plane of writing and of watching. And yes, we'll talk about the final, but the final started well before the final. It always seemed to me, and I didn't go to that walk along the beach, but what I did track down was something which Emmanuel Mayuka said that he was moved by going to it. This is one of my reports for the radio station at the time, and he just simply said, "I was a small kid when it happened, but I'd heard lots of stories about the team. I've seen some of their games on tapes. I want to do everything I can to finish what they started."
Yeah.
And it's that sense of movement and you know, you're getting in touch with something you can't touch,
Yeah.
and it just becomes so, as I say, so seductive that you just want to see if these kind of fairy tales actually happen. And this is what Jean Rodriguez Brizo also said, that I'm not a spiritual man, he said, but there was something happening in those days before the final, and certainly in that final.
Yeah, I mean, they still had the small task of overcoming the Ivory Coast, of course, who had won their semi-final. We should say through a goal from Gervinho. He does sometimes get them, but they were heavy favourites. I mean, it was extraordinary matchup in the final, Jonathan. You have the heavy favourites of Ivory Coast, who have got the household names. You've got the Tourés, Gervinho, Drogba. You've got Max Gradel, English football fans will know, Sol Bamba, a young Wilfred Bony, Cheick Tiote, and the enigmatic Boubacar Barry in goal, who we do love dearly on this podcast. And I'm sure he'll have his actual proper moment one day on this pod. But compare that to Zambia. Nobody certainly in Britain, I wouldn't have thought in most of Europe would have heard of any of their players. But they have this narrative, this spirit, this extraordinary sense of destiny going into that match. It was a remarkable affair in Libreville.
Yeah, and it's not even like it was a young side who suddenly all went to Europe. And Mayuka obviously went to Southampton, but I'm not sure any of the others ever played at a remotely high level. I mean, Chris Katongo was probably the biggest star, the centre forward. He played alongside Mayuka. Rainford Kalaba, the left winger, had been probably their best creative player in the tournament. Isaac Chancellor, the central midfielder, I think had been good. Kennedy Mwina, the keeper, was obviously a huge personality, but again, it wasn't like he'd ever played for a big club. Never really did play for a big club. So it was just this was their moment, and I think you got to give Renard credit as well. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he created that togetherness, and he helped foster that sense of destiny.
Yeah, I mean,
and Kalusha as well. Actually, I mean, Kalusha being the sort of the embodiment of the previous team. The fact he was there all the time, that must have been a huge, so it's giving spiritual leadership as well.
Of course, but I mean, Ivory Coast had their kind of story going on as well, Paul. I mean, not nearly as sort of profound and as touching and emotional, but it was their golden generation. This was their time. It was coming to an end, perhaps, for some of those players. They would obviously go on and win the tournament in 2015 with Renard in charge and another extraordinary penalty shootout. But they had this little hangover, perhaps from a previous final a few years earlier. They'd been beaten on penalties by Egypt, of course, and if I remember correctly, forgive me if I'm wrong here, was there a bit of a feeling of sort of now or never for some of these players in Ivory Coast, or was that a bit too dramatic, Paul?
Well, I don't think it was. I didn't feel it was a now or never situation. That it was just. It should have already happened.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was so curious. And for my first Africa Cup of Nations in Ghana in 2008, they were the big favourites, and it didn't happen then. And so I looked at it, and of course Egypt just swept past them, and so I always thought that somehow they were overhyped and under pressure, because nobody talked about Egypt when on that incredible run. Was it 8, 10, and 6, 8, and 10?
6, 8, 10 was the 3 they won. Yeah. So in the game you're talking about, there was they won. Was it 4-1 in the quarterfinal? Yeah, 4-1, when
Yeah.
Zaki absolutely destroyed Kolo
Mm-hmm.
Touré. Was that the quarter or was that the semi?
I think they got through.
I think they won 1-0 in the final, Egypt that year.
Yeah, that was against Cameroon,
though, wasn't it? In the final,
yes.
But as I say, my Africa Cup of Nations odyssey started with, it's going to be Cote d'Ivoire, and why is that? Well, it's because they've got Didier Drogba playing at Chelsea, and X playing in Europe, and X playing in that, and it was and all these Egyptians were just playing in Egypt, and of course nothing good comes out of Egypt, obviously. So. And they didn't win in 2010, and they were there in 2012. It was they're there. They're expected to be there. There's no reason why they shouldn't be there. And you look at the team. I looked at the team again, and yes, they're there. But they had, just because they were there didn't give them the right to win. And this always seems, and this strangely enough seemed to be what the Zambians were playing on, which is that they're there in the final, but that doesn't mean they're going to win. And Katonga, the skipper, told me, if we want to be on top, we have to climb over giants, and there's no reason why we can't. They should have won. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I look back at it because, Jonathan, right, you're right. I just didn't think it was a great final because I was too busy choking up all the time. But
well, I mean, that's the other thing about that game. I never remember a press box as emotional as that. I particularly not. Sorry, maybe that's not entirely the right way of putting it. I don't never remember a final where so many neutrals were as emotional as that.
Yeah. And it was the case that you look at it, and I looked at it, and Cote d'Ivoire controlled the initial Zambian exuberance, started to play the ball around. They were actually quite stodgy in comparison with the Zambians, but the Zambians weren't offering that much in terms of incisiveness, and they didn't create a huge amount of chances. And you just thought, this Ivorian block would just eventually crush the Zambians. And then there came a moment where the Ivorians were looking to make the play, but they couldn't because they didn't want to leave themselves open to the speedy Zambian counter-attack. So there became this really smart tactical battle going on, which would have been fine had Drogba scored that penalty. And of course, in the last 5 minutes, the Ivorians were pushing forward, and they did everything. It seemed to me, watching the game in the first 90 minutes, they did everything that can be expected to try and make the play, break down stubborn insubordinates, really, and impose the game. And it wasn't as if they sat back and said, well, okay, Zambia, you're the big team. You come and beat us. They actually tried to play that role of big team as favourites, and it just didn't happen for them on that day. Max Gradel shot, is it 2 minutes from time, which just rolls past the post. And I used to joke to my daughter that in fact it was going in, but the post was moved a few centimeters because there are other forces operating that day. And Drogba's penalty was actually going in, but the bar came down. So it's unfair, really, to say that it was now or never, because it was just a game that they somehow lost, where in fact they did everything correct to win it.
Well, it proved not to be never, because they won it 3 years later.
But I mean, by 2015, I think there was a sense that this wasn't the golden generation anymore. I mean, Drogba had gone by 2015.
Yeah, sure.
So that now or never. I mean, I remember kind of writing. It felt like every tournament I went to. So the golden generation, Last Chance Saloon. A little bit near the door of Last Chance Saloon now. They're in the back alley outside Last Chance Saloon. I mean, I guess they knew they had the tournament, which was meant to be in Libya and ended up being in South Africa the following year. So it wasn't going to be a huge weight if they lost this. But I do think I mean, you're never going to have a better chance to win a Cup of Nations than playing Zambia in the final, unless it happens to be this Zambia in that stadium at that time.
Yeah, I mean, of all the sort of concoctions you come up with, I mean, it's crazy that Didier Drogba doesn't have an Africa Cup of Nations.
Well, I mean, Drogba as well. He missed a penalty in the final in 2006.
Yeah.
He missed a penalty in the quarterfinal here. It didn't matter because they beat Equatorial Guinea 3-0 anyway. And then, but still, he sort of thought, 80 minutes to go. Drogba of all people, he scored his penalty perfectly calmly. Later this year in Munich in the Champions League final.
Oh yeah, of course.
But now he blasts it miles over the bar, not even close. Miles over.
And it's interesting because he looks round at the penalty spot.
Yeah.
And there's a little nod. No, I'm not sure if it was the same end as the shootout.
No, it was the opposite end. But the other thing that struck me was, and it becomes relevant later on, Gervinho, who's fouled for the penalty, he bursts in the box, so it's get bundled over by it's either Chancellor, I think, who pushes him over. And it is the penalty. And Gervinho goes and hugs Drogba.
Yes.
And it's so premature.
It is.
I didn't see that at the time, but had I seen that at the time, I'd have gone, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah, an over celebration of winning a penalty is crazy. We spoke about.
And then Kennedy Mwina, the keeper, does that
waving thing,
wrestling celebration thing. Which was in slightly bad taste, I think. But
it wouldn't be the last time we saw that particular celebration. But so I mean, we should really fast forward to the penalties, gentlemen, because there's
well, I mean, we should say Zambia do hit the post, and we give Boubacar Barry enough grief on this podcast for very good reason. And for Boubacar Barry fans, do listen to the podcast we've done on the 2015 semi, because we do talk about Boubacar Barry scoring the winning penalty in the final.
Absolutely.
When it suddenly all comes up Boubacar.
Yes.
After he's let them down again and again and again. But he does actually make a really good save from Chris Katongo early in extra time that Felix Katongo, Chris's brother, puts in the cross for him. He comes off the bench, puts in the cross. And Boubacar makes a really good save, turns the ball onto the post. So Zambia, I think Zambia actually were, although they were very defensive, they were slightly less defensive than they had been in the semi. But yes, it goes to the shootout.
Well, it's just as well, actually, you mentioned that moment, because I think I remember watching it, actually. You jogged my memory and thinking, oh, that was the moment. That was the moment for them. A bit of a smash and grab might be too harsh on them. But that was that moment. And then, of course, it goes to penalties. And you look at the two lineups. Surely, Ivory Coast, sort of technical ability. It's hard to predict sometimes with penalties.
The only thing I'd say about that is, in any pressure situation, and I know what happened 3 years later, slightly countermanded, but in any pressure situation, who would you back? The Bullion Kennedy Mwina or the Buster Keaton of goalkeeping, Boubacar Barry?
Yeah, well, in this particular final, Jonathan, I would go for old Kennedy, Mwina. But so the shootout begins, and it ends 8-7, but it's tense. I mean, all shootouts are tense as a shootout in a final, but I mean, what?
Not many shootouts are tense for a quarter of an hour.
Well, watching.
So I remember. So I was filing live for the Guardian, and I remember kind of ringing them at the start of the shootout, going, "Look, the shootout's just starting. I'll file 7 or 8 minutes." And 10 minutes later, they ring me back. And go, why haven't you filed? It hasn't finished.
Yeah.
And I think it might not finish for a long time yet.
Everybody seemed to be scoring. There seemed to be a problem with the penalty spot, Paul, which seemed to sort of give way after the first one. I think Cheick puts his penalty away, and that seems to be a bit of an issue, although not that much of an issue, because quite a lot of penalties were then subsequently scored.
Well, to show my flair with languages, after watching the 90 minutes with Ivorian commentary, I decided to watch the penalty shootout with British Eurosport commentary.
Yes, I also watched that as well. Yes,
and they, the presenters there started talking about the penalty spot churning up after Max Gradel and Felix Katonga had taken those, and was saying, well, that's going to be, and it's unfair of the referee Diata to not allow them to place it. I didn't, when I was watching the shootout, it didn't become immediately obvious to me that there was a problem. I was just thinking, what? It was just getting hotter and more humid, and it was. and it's kind of who's going to miss. And this is, as you say, surely these guys who grace all these top European sides are going to be able to do this. But I'm reminded of what's in these moments. It's it becomes very, very, very difficult to do what you can do normally. And we've seen it so many times in these big tournaments, and I'm always surprised that a penalty can't be scored, and then we had this thing where they were just scoring and scoring and scoring, and then it comes to sudden death, and they're saying, oh well, all the Ivorians are really lucky that that they're going first, because there's a chance that even if you do miss, your goalkeeper can save you. Well, obviously they haven't been listening to the podcast, because if Boubacar Barry's getting so much grief, the comment, the presenters. But it's the case that the Ivorians were scoring, and the Zambians were being impertinent by responding as well, and they seem to find that spot. And looking at it when Drogba came to take the fifth, and you think that takes guts to step up and do that, and of course then to score. So you then you give your team a fighting chance again, and no more could have been asked of Didier Drogba at that moment to show the guts. And interestingly, during the film A-Team, the Brito gets one of the Zambians, and he says that the Ivorians didn't want to go up. We could see they were scared.
You saw that really clearly. So there's 7 penalties each are scored, so it's 7-7. And then
Kolo Touré doesn't want to go up, apparently.
No. Gervinho doesn't want to go up. So they're trying to push Gervinho forward. He's refusing to go. Kolo Touré does step up, which Sahui gestures from the bench to get back. Gervinho's taking it. So Kolo Touré walks halfway to the box, turns around, walks back, and then Gervinho still won't go. So Kolo Touré has to do the walk again. And of course his penalty is saved. So Rainford Calaba then has the chance to win it and puts it over.
Yeah.
And there's a great shot of the Zambian bench where it's one of those penalties where it's not immediately obvious he's put it over. There's a fraction of a second where you think he's just clipped it in the roof of the net. And they all start to get up.
Yeah.
And because they think they've done it, and then...
and they were singing the song as well.
Yeah, well, they were singing it all the way through the penalty shootout. That's how they were staying calm in the centre circle. If you watch the footage, you can see them, the mouths going. And so then Gervinho is finally persuaded to miss up, to step up. But you know with 100% certainty he's not hitting the target. You know what Gervinho's like. Anyway, you know how sort of fragile his temperament is, and you think, having refused to go up, having created the environment in which you've made it much harder for Kolo Touré, who's then failed, for him to then go up. And you sort of think then, would it not have been... I think the only two Ivorians who hadn't taken the penalties were Boubacar and Gosso, the right back. You sort of think, really... given Boubacar then scores the winner 3 years later, so I think, surely one of those would have been a better
Well, maybe Barry will learn from that.
Well,
maybe, right, lads, I'll see to this,
So Gervinho goes up, and that's when the whole sort of churn around the penalty spot becomes a massive issue, because it takes what felt like 10 minutes to get the ball on the spot. Look at the footage; it's right on the back of the spot, because there's a trench around the penalty spot, and of course he puts it wide, as he always was going to. And then the least likely of heroes, the least likely man possible to win it for Zambia, Sapira Sunzu, big ordinary centre half goes forward. And
he stopped. Apparently, in the film, it says that he stopped who was going to go up and take it and said, no, I'm doing this, and he goes, he's like, because I mean, never heard of him before, and then this big strapping lad comes up and he just sort of says a few words, presumably, and so says, for the A team or something like that. And then it just goes into, I mean, it was never not going anywhere else. You see what I mean?
No, I mean, he just did exactly the right thing. Was he smashed it slightly to the right of centre. Keeper goes the wrong way. But nothing silly.
Get it on target.
Just kick it quite hard on target, and that'll probably do.
Yeah.
I mean, it was going to go in, because had they not have scored, how many match points do we need? But for me, the moment, actually, I mean, that's obviously the moment of the shootout, what you described there. But there was the incredible moment after the Drogba kick was, you think Drogba scored and you think, right, okay, is there a bit of destiny? Straight after that, Mwine, the goalkeeper, he steps up and takes one and just rolls it gently into the corner, as if to say, right, well, okay, we've got to equalise here. Let's get that out of the way. Okay, fine. And again, it just normalises the whole thing for Zambia. The confidence to see their goalkeeper do that.
Well, Mwine was quite a regular penalty taker, because in the following year, he was a regular penalty taker just in normal play, not even in the shootout. I think he certainly scored one in the group stage. He might have even scored two.
Yeah. But the way
I think he scored against Burkina Faso in the following year.
It was sensational. But anyway, they win the game and all the celebrations, Jonathan. I mean, what was it like in the press box?
Oh, but I mean, the greatest bit of celebration
is,
come on, that's what we want to talk about. So the left back, Joseph Mizonda, had been injured very early, like 10, 15 minutes into the game, had damaged his ankle, and was sat on the bench covered in ice, looking pretty miserable. He wasn't part of it. And so there's this huge pile-on, huge celebrations in the corner. And you can see, you see on the TVs that Mizonda's looking at it, and his ankle's too bad to get him down there. So there's Hervé in his white shirt, looking like the Mills and Boon hero, looking like, I don't know, like St. Christopher, picks him up and carries Joseph Mizonda so he can join the celebrations. And it's just such a wonderful symbolic moment. But I just remember, I held it together until I'd filed, and as soon as I'd filed, I just broke down. I was just in tears for 5-10 minutes, and most people around me were in the same position. You did your job, you did that as professionally as you could, but once that was over, just the release of tension. So what that must have been like for a Zambian, and particularly one of the Zambian players, or Kalusha. For Kalusha, Kalusha was in that big pylon as well.
Yeah.
Well, I remember talking to Kalusha afterwards. He got him on tape as well, and it was my voice which was cracking, and because it was always the training, which is ask the difficult questions. Do you feel as if you've done them proud? And I thought, this is too cliched, but those were the questions to ask. Can their souls be at rest? And it was, yes, those are the questions, and yes, we have done them proud, and yes, they were here tonight. And you just can't, that's why for me it's the greatest game, because I've been to loads of football matches, I've watched loads of football matches, and been very happy when my team has won. But this wasn't my team. These were other people, and seeing someone who should have been on the plane, and has lived with that knowledge throughout his entire life, and seeing all his mates go, and then being part of another team and looking around and not seeing the people you've grown up with and still soldiering on. And just to see him there, calm, answering the questions, contented, without a sense of, revenge or anything like that. He was just so inspiring in that moment of this dignity and this ability to transcend a personal tragedy and give Zambia a moment of complete joy as well. And it was it was just great interviewing him because I knew who he was, because of course 6 years before, 4 years before in Ghana, oh, is he important?
Yeah.
And 4 years later, I was able to go up and say, I know you're important now because I've done my homework. But what a great chance to go and talk to somebody who was in touch with the past, and they're very much part of Zambia's present. Wonderful, wonderful. That was a great celebration, and what was happening upstairs after all that pandemonium of victory and that release, and then the guy who had orchestrated it all. It's great.
Yeah. Paul, we could talk for another hour about this fixture, I'm sure, and so on, but it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this, the tournament, but Zambia and Hervé Renard himself and so on. It is one of the most incredibly poignant, emotional, beautiful stories, I think, from the history of football. Thank you very much for coming on the pod and talking to us about that.
Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. But from myself and Jonathan, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week for another great game.